Yes, together. Yeah. So I'll take the mic off you.
Hello, good morning. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Welcome to the WOW 2023 series. Today we have got the Southern Lakes Sanctuary presentation by Paul and Leslie. And just before we get going on that, I'd just like to say a few housekeeping things. The toilets are out the back, the other side of the foyer. The fire escapes are here, out onto the deck. You can get off there. And if it does something does happen like a fire, then we go straight across to the green. If there's an earthquake, please stay here until we can get out and then go across to the green. When this finishes, it will be followed fairly immediately by another talk. But if you go out the door at the back and do a quick right, there's some coffee and maybe some croissants left if we want to talk and mingle, if I can attract you all to that. But without more ado, I'll hand you over.
Kia ora, ata mare. Promise of croissants. I think half the group nearly went. Everyone's looking at the door already, far out. So kia ora, so I'm called Paul Kavanagh, Taonga. So I'm Paul and I'm lucky enough to be project director. I won't do too much of an introduction because hopefully people know about our project and probably a third of the people here are our staff or trustees, so that's good. So basically, we'll just get cracking straight into it. So our title for the talk today is Protecting Our Taonga Species and the kind of road to flourishing biodiversity, because biodiversity, as you guys know, being greenies, it is a complex term and it's bandied around quite a bit. But basically, that's the journey that we've started on, trying to protect our native species, because where we want to get to is where we do have plentiful kia everywhere and feel in all of our rivers and things. So what we're trying to do is get back to where we should be, which is flourishing biodiversity. We celebrate the small successes. That's really important. We need to know how to pat ourselves on the back in conservation better, I believe. But again, we need to be making sure that we have a long vision. There's things shift in baseline syndrome, where you kind of only compare to maybe a generation before. I don't know if many people here have been lucky enough to spend time on some of our offshore islands and just hear how raucous it can be and should be. So that's where we want to get back to. So we've kind of started this journey, and our goal is to protect our species for future generations. So operationally, we started about 2 years ago. I'm in the job 2 years next week, I think, and I was a trustee previously. But I did go through a full recruitment process, don't worry.
You sure did.
So I guess, yeah, we've been operational for about 2 years, but the genesis, like our story, our foundation does go back quite a lot further than that. Much earlier, we kind of talk about, so about 83 million years, give or take a couple of million years. I don't know if you remember 83 million years ago. This is kind of when Aotearoa, as part of Zealandia, split from Gondwana land. Obviously before dinosaurs went extinct, so before mammals are really, really widespread. I'm probably telling you all things you already know, I know this, but however. So it was basically a paradise for our birds and our reptiles. Now, since then, we've got over 30 species of introduced mammals, over 30 species of introduced bird species, and we've also got more introduced plants and trees than we have native now, probably. So it's just really upset that really fine balance. And because of this, we're losing about 26 million native birds in native forest patches every single year, which is pretty harrowing. So if you factor in seabirds, everything else, invertebrates, reptiles, that number will be much, much higher. So since humans have arrived in the last 750 or so years, we've lost 76 bird species. We've lost 3 frogs, we've lost reptiles, so it's pretty harrowing statistics. And again, the main driver behind this is those introduced mammalian predators predominantly. Because we lost about 43% of our land-based birds. Another 40% is in danger. So that's pretty scary statistics. But what really makes our wildlife so unique and also makes our mission much more critical is the level of endemism. So about 70% of our manu, our birds, are naturally only found in New Zealand. So no one else is kia, no one else is kaka. If we don't protect them, they're gone forever. There's no backup system. So 100% of our reptiles, frogs and bats, for example, 80% of our ferns and things. So that makes our mission really, really critical. The need is urgent and the need is great. And unfortunately, this is kind of our why. We do have probably the highest proportion of endangered species of any country in the world. pretty scary thing. In our project area, which spans the whole of this region, so from kind of Makarora, Matukutuki, Wanaka, Motatapu, Taonga, Queenstown, and up to Glenorchy, we reckon there's at least 35 at-risk species. So our wildlife really, really needs our help.
Morena. I'm Leslie Van Gelder. I'm co-chair of the Southern Lake Sanctuary, and one of my other co-chairs is here today, Greg Lind. There are three of us, because it's a huge project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our history, which is not as ancient as the separation from Gondwanaland, but sometimes feels like it. And how the Southern Lake Sanctuary was founded, and the reason we thought we would take some time to share this is a lot of you are involved in projects that involve these questions of how do you create a consortium and how do groups start to come to work together. And so we thought we would tell our foundation story a little bit more than we usually do, just because this evolution has been a great part of our learning, to be honest. In 2017, there were 6 or 7 big, and big you can decide how big you want that word to encompass, predator-free groups in the district. So working kind of from the Forest and Bird Group, who had been based doing volunteer work up in Makarora for a very long time, Taonga Backyard Trapping, which was about a year old at that point, I think. They may not have actually even incorporated, I think it was 2018 that they did, Whakatipu Wildlife Trust, Soho Properties, and Rupert and Dart Wildlife Trust, who just celebrated their 10th year this year. So that group, kind of stimulated by some conversation with some of the troublemakers up in Forest and Bird, I'll be honest, and talking to the DOC partnership team about the stimulation of Predator Free 2050. And Predator Free 2050 was a kind of moonshot thrown down by John Key just as he was leaving the building, saying, wouldn't it be cool if New Zealand could be predator free by 2050? And here we'll put a little bit of money towards that and make those guys be an entity that could accelerate the idea of getting rid of our predators. So in 2017, our group got together, started to look at how could we actually answer this question of could we do this work at landscape scale across this district? And the words landscape scale in international conservation are very common, in New Zealand relatively uncommon. And so these groups got together and we went to Wildlands Consultants and asked them would they help us work this thing out. So they were doing a feasibility study for us. And these were our 6 partners who had come together. And we're quite a wide range, which is also why it's interesting. So some of these were community groups. One's a private entity, so Mahu Whenua is Soho Properties. That's Matlang, and so that sits over the Motatapu. And wonderful for the fact that geographically, when you look at our projects on the map, there was great potential for us to eventually all align with each other. I live over in Taonga, Glenorchy, and knowing that the Matuki was doing work on their side, and then eventually, hopefully, we could meet at Cascade Saddle. It's sort of the long-term fantasy. So these became our founding groups, and we set out a set of beacons at the very start of the project, and our primary beacon was that we collaborate. And collaboration doesn't happen overnight, so we learned to know and love each other as we went through this process.
And Mo Turnbull gets the chocolate fish for
naming. Yeah, sorry. So for those of you who know Mo Turnbull, who is a Forest and Bird legend and set up the trapping group up in Makarora, when we were in the process of pulling this together, and I'll share a little bit about how that story happened, we were just a group who had, I used to call them the Wildlands group because we were all participating in this process, and at one point we had to name ourselves very quickly. And so we put out to the team and said, what are we? And, chocolate fish to the person who comes back with the best name, Mo, 20 minutes later, an email, Southern Lake Sanctuary. And it's like, that's it. That's who we are. So Mo gets naming rights, and he did get an enormous chocolate fish at our first in-person gathering. So this is the part of the story that I think all of us have these moments in our organizations where the thing falls from the sky that accelerates what happens next. We were talking last night about the idea of punctuated equilibrium. Things don't just happen on this sort of like, oh, it's all just naturally evolving. It was more like thunderbolt from the sky. So in February 2020, we'd just gotten the final report. You can imagine in the trapping world, end of summer is a pretty busy time. So the consortium, and I was leading the consortium at the time, we didn't even have time to meet. Everyone's like, oh, we'll get together, when things quiet down. And then, of course, it quieted down. So in March 2020, lockdown arrives, and I'm thinking, yes, I can work on my garden. It was beautiful weather, but no. So I'm having a lovely lockdown, and I get a random phone call from Tim Hyam from Predator Free 2050. To this day, I don't know how he had my phone number, but anyway. I've had some weird phone calls in this journey, I have to say. And he says, so we're putting together a bid because we're going to put in a big budget bid to central government because we heard rumor that there's going to be $1 billion of money for conservation floating around, and we want in. And so he said, could you guys put together a bid? Now, the consortium hasn't even met to discuss the Wildlands report at this point. So I called Ross Sinclair, who some of you in this area may know, because his family's based out in Awea. And Ross was involved in Forest and Bird and also has been a country director for Wildlife Conservation Society. So he's worked with big budgets in big places. He also has the mouth of a New Yorker, which is why I personally love him, also being from New York. So when I called him and said, do you think we should do this? The answer was, fuck yeah, which was just brilliant because I was thinking the same thing. And so he said, how much do you think we can ask for? Because we hadn't budgeted this project. And so he said, I'll call Tim. Don't you worry. And I thought, oh, this is great. And he called me back and he said, so we could ask for up to 20 million. Now, we were the usual community groups, right? $5,000 is like, oh my God, we got $5,000. And suddenly we had to go to the consortium and say, we can ask for up to 20 million, shall we? And everyone went, yeah. And it was, and I say that because a lot of you work in community groups where that's a staggering amount of money to think about when you've gone from, I'm so glad at the bake sale that we made $200 last week, to how are we going to think? But what we decided was this was a 30-year project, which it is, and $20 million was actually just going to get us started. But the consortium hustled, and we were told we had 6 days to put together a proposal. A million Zoom calls later, we had a professional proposal. It was 28 pages. It was beautiful. One of our members is a graphic designer, so he spent 24 hours making it beautiful. They thought we would send them a back of napkin, and they got something that went all the way around Wellington and back. So for us, it was the beginning of the Southern Lakes Sanctuary. And it was an amazing opportunity. We did not get that 20 million in the end, just in case you were hoping for that part of happy ending. But it was an extraordinary thing as a consortium because we all had to trust each other in a time when we were growing this over Zoom. And it was a kind of remarkable thing.
I love how I put stars in.
I know, but I didn't.
And you just went for it.
Of course I did. Ross would be mad at me if I didn't, and he might be watching this from Ankara, so I feel we have to. Simultaneously, and this is an important part of the story, for those of you who were on the Queenstown side during COVID, there was lots of, what are we going to do? And about 3 days into lockdown, Jim Bolt kind of rang around to anybody who might have good ideas and said, oh, what do you think we should do? And a number of people came to this idea of we could do a job creation program involving trails work and trapping. And so my other most random phone call of lockdown was one from the team over at AJ Hackett Bungee saying, hey, we're going to get involved in doing trapping work because we're going to run this Workforce Alliance. We don't know anything about how to build traps. Could you help us? So one of our Southern Lake Sanctuary team now, who was a trustee of the Whakatipu Wildlife Trust, I sent Phil Green over and said, teach them how to build traps fast. And they said, he's so good, we'll hire him. So the Workforce Alliance, it was a really powerful piece of the story because having a community business come to the table at a time and raised their hands and said, how can we help the district? You know, everybody's got their ideas about big business and big tourism. I just want to say for the record, Bungee were extraordinary in stepping into the breach in that moment of time. Health and safety, imagine the kind of work we do, right? Do you think we all have high-vis hanging around in health and safety? They just stepped in vehicles, you know, the health and safety of their level, staff care, And they piloted this project, which led to our partnership with them in the long term. So it's a really interesting piece of the story. Council also were the coordinators of that project. The council's recovery manager at the time, Steve Batstone, is our third chair now. So this is how all of us ended up in the ecosystem of this, none of whom normally probably would have been there. At the same time that predator-free was in our conversation, Doc woke up and were handed $1 billion to have to distribute. Not their strong suit. Generally, that's not what they've been trained to do. So for them, it was kind of a terrifying proposition. It took them a while to figure out, how do we get rid of money equitably? How do we even decide across the country where the money's going to go? All of these things, you can imagine the machinations that went on. So while we were also working with predator-free, Jobs for Nature emerged. I'll fast forward. Anybody who wants to have a croissant afterwards, I'll tell the whole dark story. But the point was, at the very end of this whole process, while we couldn't match money with Predator-Free 2050, they required a one-to-one match that we could not raise in 3 months. So we couldn't find a single person with $8 million in the district who just wanted to hand that over. Can you believe it? I mean, honestly. And it's not like we didn't try. But in the end, Jobs for Nature did come through with $1 million a year over 3 years. And so that allowed us to get started, which was an incredible thing. And we partnered with Bungie. So they came in behind us. They set up a business called GSD, which stands for Good Safe Deeds. They gave us their ops manager to become our ops manager. So our staff actually work for GSD, and Paul works for our board. And those of you in nonprofit know you never wake up on the first day of something and have an office, vehicles, computers, the entire engine of Bungie behind you. It was, for our board, it was just a miracle. And we could get started the next day. That's what was so good about it. So we were, and this, like, I just want to hammer this concept into everybody. We were formed by collaboration, through collaboration, and for collaboration. And we have continued to function that way ever since. We have 1,000 volunteers, over 1,000 volunteers in the district, leading up through almost 90 community groups who filter into 6 major groups who are our trustees and our partner groups, to the Southern Lakes Sanctuary, who sits as a strategist and support with 22 paid staff. And we collaborate with everybody in the region, and that's in our DNA and what we love to do. So there are so many cups of tea, I can't begin to tell you. Oh, that's actually, it's coffees for us, really. Yeah, so we're kind of, a lot of coffees have gotten us here.
Do you want to touch on governance as well?
Yeah, just very quickly. We created a unique governance structure because of the size and scale of our project, and also remembering that we were coming out of COVID where everybody was exhausted. But it was quite an interesting thing. So our consortium has 6 members, and each of them is very important in their own organization. So our 6 trustees sit around the table. We have advisors as well who are beyond those organizations, are often connected to them. Farming advisor, 2 of our sort of founding team are no longer trustees, but weigh in constantly as advisors, which has been really helpful. And in the first year, we recognized that the role of chair was really too big for one person in a project of this size and scale. And so we have a 3-chair model. I'm not saying anyone else try this. Kids, don't try this at home. It works beautifully for us. So Greg, Steve, and I co-chair. We each have areas of specialty. Our areas each also overlap. So there are things we do kind of in partnership, and the 3 of us meet regularly. We probably couldn't do it if Paul weren't so masterful at his social relations with all of us. You know, most of you in CE roles are going, oh my God, 1 chair is enough. 3 would be a nightmare. But for us, it's worked really well because it also has meant at any given time, any one of us can actually take some time off for ourselves, which normally you can't do in a governance role. So Greg's just come back from being away for a month. Steve and I were at the helm. Previously, I was away for a month. Greg and Steve were at the helm. And Paul always has at least one of us to bounce stuff off of.
And to annoy.
It's worked, yeah, it's worked really well. Yeah.
So I guess what we need to do is be really flexible in our approach, because all of the groups we support have their own needs, their own requirements, and they're very different. So priorities for us supporting those groups, I guess, isn't equal, because the groups aren't equal in their requirements. So some need boots on the ground support, some need community engagement support, some need admin support. We need to be flexible, but everything we do is built around relationships, basically. So a really important thing, as Leslie touched on, is that our groups retain their own autonomy and independence. We're not here to take over, we're here to support. And they also retain a voice in the overall strategic direction of the sanctuary. So it is a team effort. So I just want to play a wee video, just an example of, I think this is Amanda's one, the sort of support we do give to one of our partner groups. So hopefully the audio works.
So the Root Burn Wildlife Trust has been up here for 10 years. DOC's been going for forever. And now Southern Lakes Sanctuary's coming over the top. And it's a fantastic resource. It's providing us a big vision that we can work towards. And it's allowing us to join the dots between all the different groups. And it's allowing us to think big without the responsibility of carrying the weight of all those decisions.
So a nice video. Amanda always speaks beautifully and eloquently. The only slight correction I'd have to that is I don't like us coming in over the top. I think we come up underneath to support the groups.
So when Wildlands, we tasked them with this tough question of could we be landscape scale and what would be the methodology to do that? And the guys we worked with were fantastic. And what they came back to us with was an idea, and really looking at our landscape, which is pretty complex, was the idea that we would create a sort of core buffer corridor model, which said that we would have management hubs, and this is very typical in landscape scale work. We would have management units throughout our project area, and then we would develop linkages between them. And so in the last 2 years, we've really put a lot of energy into our hubs, building out the hubs, making sure that the hubs are resourced appropriately so that they could grow. And eventually the idea is that all of this interconnects so that there's a continuity among them. Most of our partner groups already were existing in separate areas. We really didn't have like 3 competing groups all up in Glenorchy, so it wasn't a problem. But it helped us structurally. And so we're just gonna run through the current hubs just so you can have a quick look. I will say for those of you who are on our team who are detail-oriented, the trap numbers may not be the exact trap numbers that they are today. There could be a few more or a few less. In the field, it's often the way. So if any of you guys are like, no, I'm sure there's 18 more than you said. Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk about, because I live on the other side of the hill, so I'll talk about those. Paul will talk about the ones on this side. And that's actually one of the points I want to make, that we are, with the exception of the Three Lakes Cultural Trust, we're one of the only trusts that works across the whole of the district. Our project border is the Queenstown Lakes District, so 660,000 hectares. And we deliberately chose the political boundary to be our boundary for lots of good reasons, and it has proven to be a good thing. So the Whakatipu Hub, our partner is the Whakatipu Wildlife Trust. I had been the CE of that at the beginning of all of this. In 2018, they had 6 groups. Now they have close to 90. So extraordinary explosion of interest on that side. And a lot of the traps, many of them were older, so we'll talk a little bit about some of the work of helping the volunteer groups. And you can see some of the species and the location. Nearer and dearer to my heart, because this is where I live, in the Restart Hub, pretty exciting stuff going on. I don't know how many of you saw all the news about the Takahe release, but that's in this neighborhood, and based on the work that's been taking place up there, particularly around cat trapping. And are you Makarora? No, I am. Oh, good. And the Makarora Hub, I'd been on the Forest and Bird Board for a while, so I think that's why I get that one too. And Makarora has had a very, very long-standing program protecting mohua in particular. And so, again, many of you may actually be a part of that project. But that project had a long experience and some data, which was really helpful as we pulled all this together.
And then Muratapu, so is Soho Properties. These guys are doing incredible restoration projects. I think they've planted about 1 million trees. So they've got paid staff to do a lot of their predator control. So we support kind of strategically, we provide traps and install. And then we are doing a lot of work on the Coronet face part of that, because a lot of that's QE2 covenant. So Wanaka around here. So again, I think it was established 2019. Huge potential. There's been a lot of growth recently and a lot of community engagement. So really successful winter talk series and things, and really engaged community. Just the amount of people going to those talks is really, really inspiring. Matuki Tuki, awesome work on up there. I know it's again a loose kind of consortium, but we've got, I shouldn't name names because then I'll always forget one, but some amazing work on up there. So if you imagine like Matuki Tuki Charitable Trust are coming up 11 years. There's also Diamond Lake. There's like Minaret, we'll talk about later. Amazing work on Longview Environmental and things as well. So again, Deer Stalkers or Otago Kiwi Recovery, how we help all of these groups is quite different. Some is just providing traps. We've also got boots on the ground support up there as well. And then we've got a lot of new work going on in some new hubs. So Cardrona, for example, we've been doing a lot of monitoring heavy work up there, and where there's not an established group there, that's new work we've been doing. And also Minaret, we're supporting them we're providing lots of traps as well. So really exciting. Operationally, one of the first things we did was we went out and audited and assessed traps. So pre-project was about 6,400 traps across our project area. And when we went out and audited and assessed, we've done about 100% of the ones we've been given access to, so slight disclaimer there. But about 30% required calibration. So I'm not saying they weren't working, they could have been working better. And a concern is that you don't want to get a trap-shy population where it's firing when it shouldn't be firing, because these animals are smart, they learn and they communicate. So it's really important they're going off at the right weight. And then about 20% required some level of repair as well. So bringing up the efficiency and effectiveness of the traps across the district, even that will be a huge gain for us as well. And we have grown the trap numbers quite a lot, the collective we. So pre-project, as I said, about 6,400. We've probably just hit 10,000 over the last few days, which is cool. And again, we're trying to do that really effectively, strategically as well. We reckon about 27,000 predators removed across all of our partner groups since January 2022. And suppressing predators across about 135, probably up to about 140,000 hectares, which is no mean feat. And again, that's because of our partner groups. But it's not just chucking out more traps across the Rohi. We want to be quite strategic in that as well. So we do like a scoring index. Whenever we're looking for new areas to trap, or our partner groups are, we do like a scoring index. Because again, we want to be doing this mahi in areas where there's biodiversity potential. So we do like a scoring index for if there's volunteers in the group, if there's native bush, if there's native birds to save. We also really try to increase the amount of monitoring happening in areas, because we need to know that the mahi we're doing is making a difference, because if not, we can move it to another area. So really trying to increase the monitoring work. And as I touched on earlier, the support we give to our partner groups varies quite a lot. So for some, it's engagement. For some, it's health and safety support. So having that flexible approach. But we also want to bring cohesion amongst our groups, sharing resources, things like that. We want to have a floating arsenal, I reckon, a floating army of staff, a floating army of tools that we can share amongst the groups to increase those efficiencies.
So when we first pulled this together, one of the arguments for being landscape scale and for doing this consortium approach was the idea that we could be strategic. And we've really lived by this. So our board got together and had a retreat and really worked at the questions of what were going to be our pillars and how we were going to be disciplined about our pillars. And we really have been. And so we have 4 pillars to the project, and we are always in the mindset that we are about conservation outcomes and that we are working at landscape scale. So that's our foundation, if you will. And then these 4, it's quite interesting because they're all kind of in the forefront. Sometimes very, very in our faces, and sometimes we know we're coming to. So flourishing biodiversity is obviously exceedingly important to us, but so is an empowered community. And our metric, if you will, is that we believed at the beginning of the project, if you asked who's responsible for conservation, most people would say dog. And we hoped that within 5 years, everyone would say, I am, because that's where we have to be heading. We were aware that there was not a very strong conservation culture and ecosystem, so we've stepped in and taken leadership in that space. We provided the first conservation standards workshop, which is an internationally recognized adaptive management tool. We did all the fundraising to ensure that 90 members of our conservation community could spend a week up at Cadrona being trained in this methodology. ORC's just adopted it for their new catchment project. So we know it was effective, but it also brought the tribe together for the first time ever, and we continue to do that. So we often work in that space, and that we have meaningful engagement with Mana Whenua. Obviously, it's incredibly important to us. We developed a series of focus areas. As we said, it's a big project, and so we needed to make sure that we were disciplined as well. We are not a chase the funding, chase the project kind of project. I worked in conservation in the States for a long time, and quite frankly, we just weren't going down that road. So we have set our strategy, and it follows these real key areas. As you can see at the top, relationships. We are a relational project, and it matters to us. Our storytelling is key, and so in our first year, we were relatively quiet because we needed runs on the board for one, but we didn't want to take the thunder from any of our consortium members who've been working awfully hard for a long time. So we're growing that, so you'll probably hear about us more now. But our first year, we were deliberately quiet. Our knowledge advancement is so important. So what we're learning, we share. We're open always. We share our data, we share our information, and we want everybody to be able to learn. So that's core. Endlessly measuring our project and impacts, both at the board level. We're highly strategic in this space, so we are constantly looking to see how are we doing, how are we tracking. And our project growth, our hope is to be a $5 million a year project, so no one leaves this room without at least $1 million. It's habit, it's just habit. But that's about the size that we think we probably are to be really efficient going forward to achieve these goals. So we are obviously aiming towards that. That takes a lot of time, energy, and new skill sets for some of us. And I'm going to let Paul talk about innovation because that's probably everybody's favorite part of our project. So why don't I turn over to you?
I guess a key thing with the innovation is that we know there's no silver bullets, but what has been really exciting since the ridiculously ambitious Predator Free 2050 announcement is that a lot of tech and innovation companies are now moving into conservation, and that's where we get those added efficiencies. As Leslie touched on earlier, the key thing though with all of our mahi, but especially in innovation pieces, that we are sharing what we learn amongst not just our consortium, but far and wide. eDNA. So a lot of people know about environmental DNA, and it's been used a lot in soil sampling and water sampling. We've been led by Tom. Do you want to wave to everyone, Tom? Tom's been leading this project using eDNA to monitor reptile species. Because around Central Otago, we have probably the highest diversity of reptiles of anywhere across the Motu, across the country. 16 of our 18 species are endangered to some degree. A lot of our reptiles, I'm a reptile nerd, but they look alike. And they're really cryptic, so they're really difficult to monitor. If they're difficult to monitor, they're difficult to conserve. So we need better tools that we can roll out across larger areas. So what we've been doing is leaving kind of alkathene pipes in known lizard habitat. We've been doing a proof of concept work on this, and it's been really promising. The alkathene pipes we fitted like filter brush, filter paper. We leave that out in the field. We send that away to the lab, and then we can build occupancy modeling and things from that. So initial results have been really, really promising, and we'll be doing the next tranche of that proof of concept trials over the spring and summer time. And it looks like it could be game changing. So really, really exciting space. Because it is, again, lizard monitoring is really expertise heavy, so it's really costly. This sounds like it could be a much cheaper method. Other really targeted species monitoring, we've been doing Southern Alps John Weta, FEO monitoring, with Joe's got a team going in the next couple of weeks to do some FEO monitoring across our region, which is really exciting. Bat monitoring, Peka Peka. The key one with monitoring is that it allows you to make much more informed decision making, and you can then demonstrate and prove that you're making that difference. So it's all about the efficiency of using your resources. Did I skip him there? And Joe. I told you I got a picture of you in there, mate. So Joe's our resident biodiversity monitoring specialist, and Joe's been doing a really cool project which started last week around mohua, these adorable little fellas here, mohua monitoring. And again, like a lot of our lizard species, mohua are highly cryptic. They're canopy dwellers, so they're difficult to monitor. And again, so Joe's been working with Dr. Laura Moles from Virum Group, installing acoustic recording devices in known mohua territory, and we're doing a banding project because again we need to get much more comprehensive outlook of what the species is doing in that area. So there could be a key risk for a lot of our species, or an issue is that we do get sex biases. So in a population you might have a lot of males because females are being predated on, for example. With this tech, the goal is to try to identify individual calls, which means we can get that much more comprehensive view of the population. And everyone loves slow-mo videos. So here's Grant releasing a mohua after being banded the other day. That mohua are still in our area around Makarora. That's testament to the incredible volunteer effort. Like Forest and Bird have 26 years of mahi to preserve this species, so it's absolutely incredible. And there is a rat plague on at the minute, so they're dealing with it. And when we started seeing the tracking numbers growing for rats in the area, Forest and Bird straight away went, cool, we'll get out every 2 weeks to check our 1,350 traps. That's the level of dedication, and that is the reason why we still have mohua in our region. So, because they're not found in many regions on the mainland anymore. And this bird used to be probably the most common native bird in our South Island forests. And now it's facing serious local extinction risks as well. And then we have to bring in some new tech. Because again, single set box traps are a really important tool to prevent local extinctions. But if you imagine if a trap goes off and it's not checked for a month, it's redundant for a month basically. So, and in a good year, a rat can have 40 babies or something. So it's really, really scary. So again, there's no silver bullet, but we have been working a lot with the AT220. Here's Leslie's modeling one of our latest models. So this is the only self-resetting, self-rebating possum and rodent trap on the market. It's continuously been improved. When it first came out, there was a few issues with it. It is being improved as we go. But they are expensive. So without the exciting node and stuff that we'll talk about later, it's still about $400 for a trap. If Flip and Timmy, your kind of traditional single set possum trap, is $65. So a lot more expensive. So before we went out and bought a lot of these, we did some field trials. And again, it really drove home the importance of monitoring your results. So what we did is we picked 6 different sites around Queenstown where we set up a Flip and Timmy and an AT220. We checked them daily and we reviewed the monitoring and the camera footage as well. And we got some pretty interesting results actually. So you see the amount of interest shown in this. There are a few carcasses around. So it's set up like a ramp. The possum goes up. It's a mayonnaise lure with some peanut oil and it drops down. So it's a really good pre-baiting tool as well and pre-feed. And we got lots of interest in it. But as we are also reviewing the footage, we saw some other critters that were being attracted to the area. Basically a cat vending machine. But also ferrets. So we saw some ferrets on the camera. Now ferrets are amazing little critters, but they're not good climbers, as you can see, so they couldn't climb up. So what we did was then, the next day we went in and we put some live traps out and we're able to get that ferret pretty quick. Same, we're doing a lot with feral cats in some other areas. So it's being reactive, being responsive to what you're doing. If you're not using, I'm not saying put a trail cam on every bloody trap you have, that's not feasible. But this means we're not going in blind when we can use trail cameras periodically. So what we found, about 60% of possums were caught in the AT220s. That doesn't sound like a huge advantage, but if you imagine, we were checking them daily. So we were resetting the Flip and Timmy every day, because that's why we set them close to the office. They also get rodents. So we're getting a lot of rats and mice as well. But because they're self-resetting, it means you don't need to check them regularly. So what we want to use these for is using in really remote sites, because that's where we'll get that cost efficiency. But they're not Kia safe. So Kia, the species, this is beautiful footage from Jeff Marks. So Kia are one of the species we're most trying to protect, but they make it pretty difficult because they are so curious. The 8220, when it first came out, there was some by-killer carca. So they have installed a new daytime excluder on these traps, so it doesn't go off during the day. And again, they're constantly revising that. But it's currently not Kia safe yet. So what we've done is, hope we haven't gone through too many, we partner with a group called FTP Solutions. These guys are a really high-tech innovation company. They've worked a lot in the mining industry. Don't hold that too much against them. But they do all the integrated management systems for mines. They track autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles in mines. So conservation is pretty easy for them, you think. So what we did is we sent our staff up the top of some very high hills. I'm the office chump who just says, oh, you should go up there and do it, mate. So they hiked up, they installed these gateways and the relays which talk to the traps. These nodes get fixed to the trap, and these talk to each other. So basically it's like a daisy chain approach, and that means they create what's called a mesh system. So from the office, so you can see it's also got a solar panel on the trap as well, which resets the battery as well, so it charges up the battery. So what that means is from the office, we can do all it's called the RFI planning. Don't ask me any too technical questions, but we can then from the office, before we hike up those big hills, we can say, oh, cool, if we install a gateway here, it'll talk to a relay here, it'll talk to this trap here, here, here. So it really improves that efficiencies. How much does it improve that, you ask? So we set 23 of these traps in Bush Creek in Arrowtown. Over 11 months, those 23 traps caught 1,072 pests. We then, over the same time period, compared to a random 23 traps, traditional traps, and we did it multiple times for multiple traps. The traditional traps were getting like 18 critters and 20 critters and 21. So what's that, about 5,000% increase in the traps? So, but again, I'm not saying these are a silver bullet, but they are a really effective tool in the arsenal. In about 2 weeks' time, I keep pushing that 2 weeks out, but I've been told it's 2 weeks' time, and we will have the new firmware, which we can remotely push across every single trap that has a node to arm these only when the AI monitoring, because I didn't mention there's an AI camera in there as well, and the AI camera can positively identify a possum, and we can teach it to only fire when you are 95% sure it's a possum. The default is that it's not set. So again, that's where you get that species safety for our native manu as well. We're also working with these nodes from FTP Solutions to fix to live traps. So most of our feral cat control in particular, we have to use live traps because again, the risk of Kia and also to pets. So we do live traps. Live trapping is really labor intensive. We go out and we pre-bait that trap for easily a week before we set them. When they're set for animal rights reasons, for welfare reasons, you have to go out and visit that trap every single day. And bearing in mind, most of our mahi is in pretty remote areas, so it's a huge labor component. So this mesh system will alert us when the trap triggers. So when the door closes, based on the force, we get a message to the office. We can then log on and see the images that camera has taken. And I should say with the 8220, the reason for the node, as well as the AI camera, it also means from the office, we get reports on bait levels, battery levels, what they're catching, when they're catching in real time. So it's really exciting technology. Cats, again, we like cats. Well, we like animals, but feral cats are a huge issue, as I think you know. There's about 2.5 million feral cats across out there, so doing a lot of damage. We also want to lead on advocacy and education in that space, because they are a huge issue, and a huge issue that everyone skirts around the edges. So we featured on Paddy Gower. Paddy has issues recently, and it was really well received, because again, it's important in that corridor that we're separating feral cats from stray cats from pet cats. Pet cats are not our target. Feral cats are. They're good for not good for your pet cats either. So it's really important that we're being sensitive in that narrative, but not too sensitive. We have to accelerate it. It's a monstrously big problem that nobody's talking about enough. So it's 10 years since Gareth Morgan made all his statements, and only now is it coming the norm to discuss it. So we're happy to discuss it. Because we have to focus on the why we do this mahi. I was listening to Tim Raymakers. I don't know if many of you know Tim from Doc. He always speaks beautifully about conservation. And he was saying, I'm going to paraphrase him wrongly here, but the crux of it was that we don't get up in the morning to kill feral cats. We get up in the morning to save native species. We have a choice to make. We can't have cats and Kia in those same areas. So it's all about what we're trying to save, not what we're trying to kill. We've got some lovely footage here. Bonnie took one of our field crews up in the Reese Valley having her lunch when she was visited by some juvenile Kia. It's always important that in our kōrero that we're focusing on the why we do this mahi. I don't even know what slide's next. Give me a second. So I've featured Joe. Had to feature a picture of Tom as well. There you go, mate. Again, our staff, that's really important, and when we're hiring staff, that they're good people because we are relationship driven, but that they're compassionate about the work that we do. It's not these animals' fault that they were introduced to these countries, so we need to be humane, we need to be compassionate about the work that we do. So I guess a key one as well is that our staff are supporting the groups, not replacing the groups. So just got a wee little clip here I think should play.
And we've got to change the conversation from conservation being the job of Doc to conservation being the job of all of us. And with Southern Lakes Sanctuary providing that fantastic umbrella, it's still allowing the freedom for all that energy from volunteers to be motivated, but not challenged by having too much to do. And I mean, the really exciting thing about Predator Free 2050 is the intergenerational community support, which is fantastic, but it also underpins what it means to be a Kiwi. If we can do this in our backyard, we cracked it, haven't we?
Is that still? Yeah. So our collaboration doesn't just extend, as you can imagine, just to the other people who do the work that we do. We've worked really hard to collaborate with local government, regional government, central government, everybody, because it literally takes a village. About a year ago, we started thinking about the question of that flourishing biodiversity question. And I think Paul talked about earlier that most of us have that sense that whatever you grew up with, that, you know, that's pretty good. And so it's not. There actually is an optimal version out there. And because mammalian predators were only introduced into this landscape 750 years ago, it's actually very possible to go back and find out what was here before any mammalian predators were introduced. So we went to the Queenstown Lakes District Council. We knew, so I have to put a side comment to say, before I was on the Climate Reference Group, we did go to Bill Nicol, who looks after that plan and fund, and we said, what we would really like to do is partner with you guys to see if we could get consultants who could help us create an optimal biodiversity plan for the district. So effectively, a map layer that says these are all the species that were here 1,000 years ago. Because we all want to aim for that, not the diminished version that maybe was here when I got here, or, you know, my family when they got here. So our big question is, what does that look like? So this new plan, and it is hot off the press. I mean, I haven't actually even seen it yet, but Paul did. And we're going to get a first look at it, yeah, maybe?
Yeah, we're a little bit tight for time, so what I might do, I
Yeah.
did take, just in case that didn't work, I did take
Yeah.
a screenshot.
Cool.
There's a lot of disclaimers in this from Wildlands Report. So they built the floral mapping layer for ORC. So you can click on any area in the district and you can see what the historic assemblage of plants would have been. They then coupled that with a lot of expert advice around what the faunal mapping may have been based on the floral assemblages. So, for example, I took a screenshot of the edges of Lake Wanaka here. There might have been kakapo. There might have been pio pio. There might have been tuatara back here again. So what this gives us, again, it's exciting to know that there's extinct species, but there's not like extinct species roaming around the hills before we were going out to get our coffee this morning. But it also helps guide restoration projects. If we're not going to be able to return downtown Wanaka to kakapo habitat, unfortunately, sorry to burst any bubbles, but we can also do the same sort of mahi in adjacent to national parks, in other areas that aren't completely degraded. We could say if we plant Phyllocladus, like celery pine, if we plant Totra and Kapuka, Griselinia broadleaf, sorry, that we could potentially have habitat for these sort of species.
I'm just going to pause you for a sec to say, a lot of you have been in the discussions this week about how is there that larger scale connection point between the different types of conservation groups. So, you know, with Takakano's work or Wakatipu Reforestation Trust or Trees That Count, this plan starts to give us a plan that's built not out of geography in the sense of, well, we work over here and you work over there, but actually built on the real foundations of what the biodiversity was. So it should give us all a common language to then say together, how do we plan together to create habitat to then be able to reintroduce species collectively across the district. So that's why QLDC came in as a partner, because it is a district-wide endeavor.
So I guess we're always stronger together. When we work together, some amazing opportunities arise. And I think, as Leslie said earlier, the Takahe release in the Greenstone Valley was a really good example of that. I was lucky enough to be there for that. It was a dock translocation with Manawhenua onto Kaitahu tribal land. It was the most humbling and motivating experience of my career. To have a species of bird that was declared extinct in our region, back in our region, because of that teamwork is just incredibly inspiring. It's not just take. We've ground plans for mohua, for robin, for fio, back in some of the areas. I was returning our lost Taonga species. Just this slide is also interesting because it's a little bit dated now, but you see the spread of the different traps across our areas. So we've got organizational level access and Trap NZ. So we can see all of the traps from all of our partner groups. That means we can then identify where the gaps are, areas where we need strengthening as well. So it's really, really cool. When we share that knowledge, it gives you a much clearer picture.
So I think that the ethos at Reese Valley has always been tied to the health of the environment. Every generation that's been here has loved this place the way it is.
Southern Lakes Sanctuary has been a great advancement for us. It brings together a whole lot of groups who are trying to do their own thing, and it gives us the opportunity to fill in the gaps in the predator control areas and try and get full cover. So we're supporting it wholeheartedly.
To be able to kind of tap into the extra predator control that Southern Lakes Sanctuary brings to us is pretty cool, really. It's a big place, we can't be everywhere all the time. With the help of an organised, funded group that's doing that stuff as their everyday business instead of trying to fit it in around the edges like we all do, you know, that's fantastic. That makes a huge difference to what can be achieved.
Takahe are just so exciting, it's ridiculous. To have them wandering the hills would be magnificent. Yeah.
Once the possibility was raised, it was like, wow, how cool would that be? Because, you know, they're a pretty iconic species for New Zealanders. I mean, we already have some pretty cool species here, but to be able to reintroduce things is actually a really awesome goal. In a way, it's a sort of a validation of how we have maintained this environment in a state that it is habitat for species that have been present here in the past and ideally will be again in the future.
So I guess now what we need to focus on is the mechanisms, the ways we can achieve our biodiversity goals. So predator-free, I've robbed a couple of slides from them. There's kind of 4 different options they've split them up into. And what's been another upside of all of our COVID talk is that some of these words are now in normal vernacular for people about elimination and eradication and stuff. So I'll quickly shoot through them. The first option, we're not going to do that, eh? Do nothing. I don't think anybody's here because that's an option. Suppression then. So they've done some nice graphics around this space. So predator suppression is currently what our project is in. So we're trying to keep predator numbers down so our native species can still survive in some areas. We're here preventing local extinctions. The next stage we want to get to is elimination. Elimination is where you will get reincursions. We're using landscape barriers, so big mountains, glacial-fed rivers, things like that, to reduce the likelihood of some of those species reinvading. So being quite tactical about it. Climate change is obviously having quite an effect on that because we are getting more of our native manu being squeezed and native reptiles being squeezed into smaller areas, but we're also getting more regular masting events, but we're also getting, anecdotally anyway, stoats, for example, are alpine specialists. The common kind of knowledge around what height stoats are living at seems to definitely indicate that they are moving higher. We've one of our groups has caught 2 stoats at 2,010 meters this last summer. Rats are moving higher. Traditionally, we'd say 1,200 for rats. Some people are reckoning it's getting higher and higher. So it's another thing to consider in our site selection is what that site will look like in 10 years because of climate change, in 20 years. 30 years, hopefully there'll be no predators. So. And that's when we get to eradication. So we talk about kind of island eradication where we can get numbers down to 0 and maintain it to 0. So that's the difference between elimination and eradication. Eradication is keeping numbers down to 0. That's the long-term goal. So we then asked Wildlands as well, based on funding from QLDC again, to identify and rank some elimination sites for us. So they consulted with Predator Free 2050 and ZIP, and again using those landscape scale barriers. This has changed slightly, so I won't go into too much details, but they use a scoring matrix based on kind of biodiversity in the area, native bush, those landscape features, feasibility as well, and what the likelihood of community uptake and community involvement was. So a really thorough way they've done it. They've been really great to work with in this space as well. And they've identified 5 of those sites. So this is still in draft form, but so far you can see some of the areas. So Makarora, Matukituki, the Reese, up in around the back of Mount Crichton, and the Greenstone as well. Don't challenge them, it's only in draft, okay. So really, really exciting space. So they then mapped kind of what are the barriers in the area, but also what is there to protect, what the vegetation layers are, where are important birding areas, where there's peka, where there's bats in those sort of areas, and that all fed into their site selection criteria.
So when we first started this project, you know, and had our 6 days to pull together what the Southern Lakes Sanctuary was going to be, one of the things that was very clear to us was that this wasn't a short-term project. You know, this is a 30-year vision. So whether you aim for 2050 because that was the number put out there, or a reality that says it's a 30-year picture because it's a long shot. When we talk to people about funding, particularly internationally, we discover that we have some conditions that nobody else in the world has positively. And it's often one of my favorite things to be able to say, living in a country where there's 0 corruption when it comes to this stuff. Funders can feel good about the fact that if they fund our work, it goes straight into the work, as opposed to some of my colleagues where 30 to 40% of any bit of funding goes into governmental corruption, and they all know that. And so our 30-year picture is kind of at the pace that we're at now. We could be a 10-year picture if we threw everything at it, because the only things in our way are predators. And that's an amazing opportunity, which not everybody has. So by the numbers, just to give you kind of our story, and this is my pitch part, in case you hadn't noticed. I do this all day, every day, as does Paul, because we're in a challenging situation in that we were initially funded by Jobs for Nature, which was a sort of miracle, right? We had this lightning strike come of $1 billion into the ecosystem that really stimulated the ecosystem. And while it was designed to be a job creation program, and we created 22 jobs out of it, I remember the first staff meeting I attended because I had been writing proposal after proposal referring to all of our FTEs, and then suddenly I met them, and it was Tom and Joe, and it was like, yay, you're real people. Because, you know, that was our goal, was get jobs, and not just average jobs. We brought people home from overseas who had never had career pathways in New Zealand except for doc. And so we don't want to lose them. You know, that's critical because they're contributors to the community and incredibly important people here. So for us, it's a hard one because we now have to find that $1.5 million a year, and all of conservation in New Zealand who participated in Jobs for Nature will lose their funding in the same moment in June of 2024. So having built up an incredible ecosystem, the cliff will also come. Sorry, guys. However, we're working hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the opportunity of a new government, who knows? They haven't had an opinion yet. So perhaps they'll be wise. We encourage you to encourage them to do the right thing, because why would you lose the gains that we've worked so hard for? And when you see the benefit of it, there's a benefit beyond the financial, beyond the jobs, and beyond nature. It's actually community. Ultimately comes down to the degree of resilience in the community that is built while walking around, checking traps together, and connecting back into our natural environment is incalculable. So it's a really important piece. You want to talk? Yeah.
Yep. But again, we are looking far and wide. We're trying to be as creative as we can about where we're looking for funding for our future. One of them is with Finn Ross from Carbon Z. So we are just gone live as an option for some biodiversity credits. We're the first operation in the South Island to be available for that. So biodiversity credits is a really, really interesting space. This could potentially provide enduring funding for a lot of our conservation mahi across our country. It's really interesting because it's slightly different to biodiversity credits in other countries, but also different to carbon credits. It's not offsetting. You can't fund some biodiversity credits to save mohua so you can then destroy mohua habitat and things. It's not an offsetting one. It's basically currently, it's a legitimized donation. It's all auditable. Once there's a clear link between, a logical link between your action, your mahi that you do, and the biodiversity goals, it funds that action, which is great because if it's quantified based on a biodiversity increase, obviously there's no upfront money, so you can't do the mahi to do it. So it's really clever way to do it. And each one is slightly different because obviously our operations in Matukituki Valley are a lot more expensive than our operations in urban Queenstown or urban Wanaka. So it's focused in biodiversity areas. The pressure that species you're trying to protect is under, the work has to align to those threats. For example, there's no point, basically, if for mohua, for example, rats are the main issue, so your action plan has to tailor around best practice for trapping rats, for example. So here's some of the examples that we are going live with soon. So for mohua, what you do is you protect X amount. Each biodiversity credit equates to an amount of hectares that are protected, and there's a value assigned to that. So we've got some for Kia and for mohua going live soon. So really exciting space, but we are very early adopters of this.
A lot of people, a handful of you guys were in the workshop the other day on conservation funding, or sort of this sector's funding. And we've taken very much a mosaic approach. You know, having been funded by a single fund at our outset, quite frankly, we never want to be in that position again, especially being beholden to central government. So we've worked really hard to develop a sort of mosaic approach, which has been fascinating, to be honest. And this, again, is where our three-chair model has worked really well. Greg looks after our funding portfolio, where we're in relationship with Central Lakes Trust and funding bodies who set what they say as the parameters, and we try to meet those parameters. They've been a hugely important partner to us. We could never have done the work that we do without Central Lakes Trust coming in to support, because Jobs for Nature gave us money for jobs, but no money for traps. So Central Lakes Trust came to the table and gave us support. And what they wanted was that landscape scale approach. AJ Hackett Bungie, I can't say enough good things. They never say enough good things themselves, so I will. Because they gave us initially office space, vehicles, computers, health and safety, Matt Hollier, just alone. That alone is like one of the greatest gifts ever given. But they've also come in to support us now that we're facing the cliff with $300,000 over the next 3 years of support because they want to see the rest of the tourism industry start to step up to at correct levels. So they are industry leaders in that space. Philanthropically, people in the community have come forward and say, we love what you do. How can we come in and support you with unrestricted funds? So we've had some unrestricted funders, but it takes a mosaic, and it's not easy, as everybody in the NGO space knows. And we search for enduring funding just like everybody else. So you cannot leave the room or have croissants until you help us.
A key one as well in the funding space is that it has to fund people as well. A lot of grants locally do not fund staff. If we are to accelerate our conservation goals, we need the staff, the boots on the ground to support the community groups. There's no point getting funds for traps if you have nobody to set the traps, for example.
I saw this cartoon the other day and just liked it so much I figured I had to share it because conservation is all about the people. So for those in the back row, the New Yorker cartoon is pointing to the humans, saying they're the invasive species that will destroy the environment if left unchecked. Because that is kind of how it is, but we're also the solution. And so you see our beautiful staff over here on the other side who are the solution, and everybody in this room is the solution.
So I guess our conservation needs are great and they are urgent. And we have a huge challenge ahead to protect our native Taonga, but luckily we can mobilise an army in this sort of area with amazing dedicated volunteers, and the technology is coming on board closer and closer to help accelerate that work as well.
This is core for who we are. Bruce Jeffries, who was one of our original architects, always reminds us that we're in World Heritage here and that we are at the gateway of World Heritage. And World Heritage is about a gift from the past to the future. And we see ourselves, all of us, and doing conservation work is that it is a gift from our generation to future generations. And so, we think about our own kids and grandkids and 7 generations beyond. That optimal biodiversity, that's what I'm looking for. I want that to be our future.
Yeah, I want my kids to be able to grow up and see Kia in the hills and stuff. That is a legacy opportunity that we can leave for future generations, basically. And I think, again, we leave it with Amanda because she says it quite beautifully.
Generational stuff. We want to be able to look our mokopuna in the eye and say, we tried.
So I kind of touched on one of Tim's nice quotes recently, but a key one, we can't have tui and rats. We can't have Kia and cats. We can't have possum and keridu. So it comes back to a choice. The beauty for our current generation is we have that choice. Future generations might not have that choice. So that's what we need to focus on. That is a massive opportunity. It's so motivating. So I think we should take it, eh?
Thank you all. Really appreciate you all coming out this morning on a cold Friday morning for all the support that we have for this work and all the support that goes forward. Can we answer any questions? Jim?
Yes, thanks for the brilliant talk. And
this is being
recorded. Yes, thanks for the brilliant talk and lots of useful ideas. Now, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Well, firstly, please change that cartoon to a weta. I would like to see feisty wetas jumping out of the alpine hills.
Are you good at drawing?
Anyway, so you're working with a country whose DNA is quite different. Those of us who used to travel to a few decades ago, you'd arrive in New Zealand and the announcement as the aircraft was coming in, we are an island nation, and the next thing they'd do is they'd fumigate the aircraft. And so it was all about, unlike USA where it's about security and guns, it was all about biodiversity. So you're working with a population that is actually highly aware that we're an island nation and we've got to protect these valuable taonga. And so it's in our DNA, and we got it from a young age. I'm just wondering, what would you apply, Leslie, as you now are the chair of the Climate Reference Group, the lessons you have learned from this, where everybody here and a lot of people in this country are passionate about our biodiversity, but they're not so passionate about climate. So what are the lessons that you've
To
learned?
me, that's a great question, and thank you for that, the opportunity to bridge the two, because I think the answers are fundamentally the same, the people, the people, the people. I find being involved in a relationally driven project is the answer, because when you look at our strategic pillars, innovation drives our activity, but our activity comes from us being collaborative, from us being open, from us knowledge sharing, from us endlessly having cups of tea so that we leave nobody behind. And this to me is the most critical part. I think any of you have been at talks that I've been at all week. It's not that you run out front and leave anybody in the tail behind. The point is, in climate change in particular, where it's terrifying. You know, it's every time you send me an email, I have to pause and go, thanks, Jim, because you're sharing with me reality. And when we do this work, it's the same thing. But the biggest piece coming out of this work, see those guys over there? They were thought to be extinct, not one time, not twice, but 3 times in your lifetime, Jim. So, and here they are roaming about in my neighborhood now because of the hard work of people who have bred them, have brought them back, have taken the risk to put them back out, not on an island sanctuary where you've got a good chance that it'll all work out. I mean, for the Takehe team to actually say, we know there are cats out there, we know we might lose some. The entire village of Glenorchy follows the bi-weekly news reports that we get on how they're all doing. I have more people stop me on the street and say, are the Takehe all still happy? I'm like, yeah, but they've been partner swapping. They're like, yeah, that happens in Glenorchy. You know, and so it's hope. We need hopefulness, and we need the knowledge that if we act together, we act strategically, we're disciplined, and I will throw that in there. You don't go chasing every shiny thing out there. You find and stick with, but if we can do it together. So I think climate change is no different. And if anything, we all know that climate change is embedded in biodiversity. So it's not climate change versus biodiversity. We are biodiversity. Our planet is biodiversity. It's the only home we have. So I think it's the same lessons apply, and that same sense of work together, don't compete with each other.
And I'd like to say we're not owners, we're only caretakers.
Any more questions? I have a couple, if I may. One of the things that's obviously taxing a lot of people is cats. Can those traps be adapted to actually recognise a chip and allow a cat to be zapped if it hasn't got one?
Yep, that's a work in progress. The key with that, again, is it does add costs. So we would use that in areas as well, even for educational tool, because we could affix that to the live traps, so it would only close if your cat isn't chipped, for example. The AT220s are not a cat trap. We've caught maybe 2 or 3 with our 130 or so we've got in operation. Really hungry, young, feral cats. They're not a cat trap, but we could use that as a really great engagement tool. We could say, this trap has a daytime excluder. This trap has a microchip reader. If you keep your cat indoors at night time and you microchip your cat, it's absolutely no risk to it. So that would then get that kind of buy-in from communities as well. So yeah, like stuff like that is easy for these companies. We just need to make sure there's enough of an appetite for them to develop the technology, because it is coming. It's all economies of scale as well. So the more people that get involved, it should hopefully drive the cost down and make it more feasible for people.
The other question is one that you personally may not be able to answer, but it was about eDNA. Has it actually managed to identify any new species of reptiles in the area?
We were doing it in Mokomoko Sanctuary, where there's known species in there. because we are still at the proof of concept trials. We're trying to do it in an area where you can manage the kind of external influences on that, so we can really see the results. So not yet as we know.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'd just like to say one thing. There's an American expert, I'm afraid I've forgotten his name, on conservation, who said you cannot protect a species, you have to protect the habitat. You have to take an all-inclusive view.
Yeah.
I think it's great that we've got you as a group sitting above the groups, which were in some cases more concerned about doing individual things and actually bringing it to another level. And long may it continue. And I'd like to thank you both, Leslie and Paul, for coming along today and giving us such a great talk. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you.
And there should be some coffee. You may have to divide up any croissants. They may have gone. But turn right through there. Thanks.